Hi there, welcome to the Dylan Rounds case. So in recent time, many people have questioned and wanted to know, where did the killer James Brenner dispose and bury of Dylan Rounds' body? Where is the burial site? Well, today I'm going to reveal to you the alleged location. Now you might wonder why I've used that word in the title. That's to protect myself, okay, for stability. This is based off details given along the way, and for some people it might not sound good enough. So don't worry, I'm going to provide to you a backstory of how things played out, vaguely speaking, and how I was able to locate the area and how I was able to find it by doing my own analysis. As well, today it's advised for you to stick around and watch from start to finish, because it is an interesting video and answers to questions are given, so that should help with people's understandings. It might open up some additional questions of how come Dylan wasn't found earlier, or where were searches done. That can be saved for later or in another video. Okay, welcome to those that are watching this live premiere. Good to see. Share your thoughts, opinions, reactions in the live chat box on the right hand screen, and anyone in general, if you got any reactions, thoughts, opinions or questions, leave them down below under this video in the comment section. You'll also find a pinned comment by me with some additional links if you wish to check them out. If you want to support this channel, there are ways to do so. Obviously, big shout out to the people once again in recent time for their support on this channel directly or in the background. Much appreciated. And as well, if you haven't quite catched up on my recent videos, the breaking news on the Dylan Rounds case, James Brenner, the plea deal, details being revealed, charges being dropped, all of that shocking news, and even the cause of death being revealed officially, top right corner of the screen, click on that I symbol. You'll be able to find videos like that, which I've uploaded the last few days. Make sure to catch up on that so you get a better idea and a full understanding of the ongoing story and the developments along the way, okay? So in terms of the burial site location, in recent time, amongst people questioning and that intrigue building within people, there has been a lot of this elsewhere by different people and channels, and not for the right reasons either, okay? There's a lot of talk, but there's no action. Until today. Once again, War Like Wrath gets hands in and tells the visual story and presents it to people, and at least one person is competent enough to provide coordinates as well, when, as we've known in the past with the likes of just simply Don Hatley's trailer, couldn't even provide that, and when others did provide it, like Ty Corbin, Earthworm Infotainment, Lance Kelly, they gave the complete wrong location. Plums. Okay, so it's under control today. Just make sure to listen in so you fully understand. Now we need a brief backstory behind this location and how I was able to locate it myself, roughly speaking, just so you understand, because I know people are very skeptical, on edge, and may question everything. So if I can answer some of your questions, it might calm you down a little bit. So yes, granted, just recently, the likes of Weezer gave a location, roughly speaking, in between the Grainshed property and the pond. But as we know, Grainshed here, pond over there, it's kind of diagonal, somewhere in the middle. Not exactly clear enough, but I understand why it's vague. Though besides that description, I was not influenced by that. I did not locate the area specifically because of that description. I learnt about it in other ways days before. I wasn't able to make a video immediately because I needed to know if the time was right to make the video public, right? And it was. But unfortunately, what did follow was the breaking news of, whether you call it a preliminary, the appearance by Brenner in court with that breaking news, cause of death, the sentencing as for like certain numbers for different charges. All that came about just recently. So we had to look at that first because it was ongoing breaking news. because the dust has settled a little bit now, I've got time to look at it, cover it, and put it all into perspective with what we've heard previously and what I've heard previously as well. So it's only like 2 to 3 days difference between me understanding the location and some of the viewers getting an idea as well. But we need to be specific, and that's why I'm here. So you might think you know the location, but do you really? That's why hopefully with my map analysis today, it'll put things into better perspective. Now I did measure things out in distance like with what Weezer was suggesting, and it ties in line with what I originally knew of. And as I said, it was only 2 to 3 days difference, that's all. And with the breaking news in the background, I didn't want things to be overshadowed. There's a point in time, right place, right moment to present the stuff, and now is the time. As for previous locations and people talking vaguely, you had the likes of Bob Farrell doing a lot of this. You had the likes of JLR doing a bit of this in the background all of a sudden, and even Lance Kelly like that. And, early on about Dylan's burial being found, the gossip and the talk was, oh, it's in Montello, Nevada. Oh, it's in the mountains. What are you on? Exactly. Oh, it's down Tunnel Spring Road, but near to or just off Tunnel Spring Road. How poor and vague those descriptions are, right? But in terms of the description that I was given, it took some time to piece together, and you will see it for yourself within the map analysis because I did highlight roads. There's a lot of different beacons, markers, and I will explain that when we do get onto the maps. I have incorporated the date of Dylan's death, the timestamps, and some future beacons as well, which came about with time. And I did label it 2022 or 23 or 24. So it's not all on the same day, right? Because some things happened on the day of the 28th, other things happened at a later point, whether it be items being found, Dylan's body being recovered. That's just for clarity because it needs to be as clear as possible, okay? Now, some of you may think, okay, so you've received a description and it was detailed enough to pinpoint the location and there was additional confirmation by the odd individual. Okay, is that good enough? How would other people know when there's others out there that supposedly know the same thing and talk, but in different areas and locations? Well, this is based off, some people know this or that because they've been told it by somebody else that has heard it from someone else, and that's about it. The way I've heard about it was from people that have been to the area, physically in real life. They've seen it for themselves. That's what the important factor is. This isn't just coming from a message being passed on from what they've heard, from what another person's heard. This is directly from the horse's mouth of the odd individual that has been out there firsthand, seen it with their own eyes, and it's noticeable as well, like with the soil turned over and the dip and stuff. There might even be the odd description as well, which can show up on screen, just for privacy reasons and respect there. I'll just crop certain bits out. But if there is like a brief description as well in terms of how it visually looks, I will present that to you very shortly if possible. If it's not available, we'll just get straight onto the maps. But as I said, description was given, somewhat detailed, and then I tracked and traced it, pinpointed roughly, then responded back. How's about this? Is it reasonable? Is it accurate? Slight little adjustments, and boom, pinpoint. So with a bit of a description and my own map knowledge, and considering I've hovered about these areas in the past unknown to me, but now I'm aware, I was roughly in the area, I did manage to locate the place. And what I also want to highlight, which is very interesting, is the fact that Warlike Raph, who isn't even from Lucin, Utah, never been there, nor is Warlike Raph even from the US, yet I was able to find the spot, obviously with the help and credit of some, but I was able to pinpoint it myself, and I'm not even from that country. So it just goes to show that the usage of maps, satellite imagery, it can be so powerful and effective for the right reasons. You don't have to experience it yourself. You don't even have to be from the area. As long as you got an understanding of the area from the visual perspective, the distance, the key names, the locations, and even visually remember it, that's good enough. So it's possible for me. It'll be possible for you when it comes to maybe working on cases or making senses of mysteries, etc. Okay? So, with that being said, hopefully that kind of puts things into perspective to you, in case you're wondering. Let's now move on. What you see on screen is a brief description visually of what the individuals saw for themselves when they were at the site, the location. You know, it's kind of like a dead giveaway, no pun intended there. So they were mentioning how the dirt they dug, so by authorities, is distributed all around. So obviously soil disturbance, soil turned over, so it will appear different in colour as well. So it'll appear that the area has been disturbed for obvious reasons, being dug out. That's one indication. The fact that there is a hole and the dirt is distributed around it, with a hole, obviously the burial spot. Now it says the number 3, I'm assuming 3 foot deep and about 6 by 4. Is that width and depth, width, length, a fair size? You can tell it was dug out, but you would have to be right on top of it. And that's because of, you know, the area what we're going to look at, it's not quite flat ground. And there are a few blind spots depending which way you're looking at it. Okay, it'll make more sense when we get onto the maps in just a second. I just wanted to provide to you this like witness account of what an individual saw for themselves when they were up close with the location, the key indicator, and the obvious fact that it's being dug out, there is a hole, fair size, depth, Dylan Round's body, burial site located. And then that description passed on to me, I traced it, and I found the location. That's how things worked. Good cooperation, good communication, simple as, okay? As I said, there was a few other people in the background with the mouse going tape all over the place, taped off, blah, blah, blah. Not from the looks of it here, it was just mainly a hole dug out and soil distributed, okay? That seems to be it. Now, let's get onto the map and reveal the location. Here we are. So granted, there are a lot of markers and it might seem a bit overwhelming, but don't worry. We're going to go through it bit by bit. I'll probably ask a question, whether it be a poll in this live premiere or a poll on my channel community page. Be sure to head on over at some point. I'm thinking of doing a poll such as, once we've gone through the location here, is it worth taking another look at it in the future, whether it be tracing back, retelling the story, trying to understand how specific things played out, etc. If there's any unfinished business, be sure to let me know what you think in the poll voting option. Now, it was colour coded. The first one to highlight, this dirt road here, which is highlighted in yellow, covers a fair bit of distance. That same road goes across the border into Montello, Nevada. And over this way, it's in Lucin, Utah. It's one named road and it goes all the way through. And I've highlighted it just here as a brief marker and reminder. Tacoma Road. I've labelled this just because it was a part of the description when I was trying to trace back the area of Dylan's burial site, okay? If I zoom in very quickly, okay, because we can do it in greater depth and length, down here, where Dylan's body was found, 9th of April 2024, and then located by others at a later point, okay? I will flip the image. I'll put the area into perspective shortly, but if you're desperate for coordinates, roughly, those are the coordinates, roughly speaking, okay? Close that down just for now, because I need to explain the rest. So in terms of Tacoma Road, that does have some significance from the past. Just as a brief history lesson, if we zoom on into the Montello, Nevada side, as you'll be aware, Bald Eagle Mountain over that way, Pilot Peak further down, okay? In this area, somewhere around here is what we were looking at in the past to do with the event of the 25th of May, 2022, when Dylan Rounds came across Chase Venstra for the first time, when Chase Venstra was battered, bruised, missing shoes, and on the side of a gravel path near to Tacoma Road, okay? We were able to locate it in the end. But one thing that confused me back then, and it did in recent time, was there was two named roads which split apart from one another, as you see on screen in the middle. One's called Tacoma with an E. The other one is called Tacoma, like a taco, okay? Just as a heads up, Tacoma, pronounced with an A, goes down that way, okay? Towards the mountains. Tech with an E, Tacoma, goes in that direction, which is heading towards Lucin, Utah, which is more or less facing towards east. Okay? So, when I was given the description and I traced it myself, you got Tacoma Road. It covers a fair bit of distance. Okay? So we just follow it on down. It'll help. Winds in and out. Now, you'll notice a blue marker. That's another dirt road which leads to Don Hatley's trailer. The reason why that's highlighted in blue is that's to do with the events on the day of Dylan's death, as it's highlighted 28th of May 2022. Okay? Same with the phone being dumped on the way. That is the possible pathway, direction Brenner took when going down to Don Hatley's for that barbecue. More about that can be looked at later in this video. I just wanted to point it out for you, okay? So Tacoma Road, once you get to this point here, turning left would get you towards the pond area, which means going through the wash, as you see as it dips down here. But you don't go left, you go right. And I believe down that way, I believe is Pilot Mountain Road or so. I've highlighted in blue. And if you follow it that way, highlighted in blue, it does get to the back end roads, the back dirt roads, and the other gate, okay? As Candice Cooley described when explaining Brenner's route to Don Hatley's place and the pond area, okay? More about that later. Before going down Pilot Mountain Road, on the left here, hard to see, a faint dirt road tracks, you take a left. And when going down this way, you are going towards the grain shed property, but before that, you're going towards one of the gates. A gate which I've never covered on my channel before. A gate which is different to the one Dylan Rounds was at, okay? The one Dylan Rounds was at was further on. And if I zoom on out, can you see over there in the distance? 2022, Dylan calls Grandma 6:51 a.m. That's the gate which we all know. That's the one JLR went to and recorded it being fenced off with that, that poor gate, wired, bits of barbed wire. You could easily flatten it down and it was facing towards the grain shed property, right? You should know that. Now, we're not looking at that right now. We're looking at the other gate in which nearby Dylan Brown's burial site can be located. Okay, so I followed Tacoma Road, if it's still called that, maybe it's not, but no, it should be, I believe, because it shows up on Bing Maps. It's in parallel to the wash, in case you're wondering, which is here, and also parallel to the railway tracks there. Let's follow it on down. Now, the reason why it continues on is because that's going on towards the grain shed property. It was confirmed that the gate, as we see here, kind of in the middle, is the gate. It might not show clearly on maps. Not everything does. The only reason why I was able to detect a gate in the other area over there was because there was a black line going across, so it looked like a barrier. And then it was later confirmed with the phone ping markings when Mob Crew Chris did his video and explanation, okay? That's why I was able to pick it up easily. Whereas here, it's very difficult to see, but there is a gate. You might be able to see a few dotted lines and stuff going across. So this is confirmed to be the other gate and access way towards the grain shed property. Okay, and this is where you start approaching the property of the grain shed, the open land. And you might wonder, well, why is that? Because if we rotate facing south or so, see that blue marker, fence line? There is a question mark there. There's no questions. That is the fence line. Okay, I forgot to take the question mark out. The individual confirmed besides the gate, that was the fence line. And it will become very apparent to you when we work our way down there. Of course, the main spot roughly in that area just there, not far from the fence line. We'll get to that in a second, but we need to follow the fence line down so you understand the perimeter, the boundary of this grain shed property and the land within it, because it's a fair size. What you see highlighted in black, that black line, and it does come to a bit of a point, a bit of an angle, that is the fence. I'm guessing maybe barbed wire or so to keep people from getting in. It's because like private. Okay, does that make sense? And next to it, you see faint track marks, lightly coloured, which go so far down. Whether those track marks are because of Dylan's burial or the track marks were there all the time, who knows? But I just wanted to point that out because it looks like they kind of stop in certain areas. So we follow the fence line down. It does get a little bit difficult to see. I did the boundary line just a bit over so it didn't overshadow the actual fence line, right? Just as a guideline more so. But you can see that thin line, black dotted line going all the way down in parallel to my red marker. And the reason why it becomes apparent to you is because look at this. It obviously reaches, I don't know why it blurs, a bit of a glitch. Can you see that there? Reaches a point, the angle. So it's like either a giant rectangle or a giant square, the perimeter, the property, the land, okay, on the grain shed side. And it goes all the way down there, all the way down to the gate, which Dylan Rounds used to access on the 28th of May 2022, okay? That's facing east. We turn it back round facing the other gate way, and the beginning of that fence line from up that way, that's facing north, okay? Just nearby, you got the bra shed here. Now, honestly, I don't know if people call it the brass or the bra shed. That's what I heard it as. It sounds very weird and odd, but this was the area, the location where Lance Kelly visited, like a small makeshift shed, and there was all discarded clothes inside. Bras, underwear, trousers, jeans, tops. You remember? A little bit weird, kind of questionable. Were people camping out there? But why would they leave their clothes behind? Were those clothes stolen and dumped there? Who knows? Was it to do with Dylan Rounds? Probably not. Lance Kelly did report it into the police. We never heard an update regarding it. So this could be a load of BS, but this is just a memorable area as to where Lance Kelly was in the past and seeing it firsthand, documented, boots on ground. So Lance Kelly wasn't too far away from over that way, in a way, okay? You do see like a dirt track which actually bends off to the right up to the shed, so that's kind of interesting, okay? What we'll just do quickly, follow the perimeter line, the fence line, all the way down to here, to this point. Looking south, you got Sun Tunnels. Looking over that way, you got Dylan's farm. I'm not sure if I did mark it on the maps today, but we can always return back to it if need be. And facing that way north is to the grain shed property, which you obviously see here with the trailers, vehicles, some missing because it is updated ever since, right? Even the gate itself doesn't show us clearly now, but when we looked at the 2019 imagery in the past, it looked like there was a black barrier going across. Okay, I'm sure it's still gated or fenced, whatever, now, and it's probably been improved since with the new property owner, but I just wanted to point out to you so you're familiar with all the different areas and angles of what we're looking at, okay? So that's looking west. That blue line is the back roads in which Candice Cooley described Brenner's journey to Don Hatley's for the barbecue, supposedly. Okay, we can put it into perspective when it comes to the disposing of Dylan Rounds as well later on in this video. But let's just trace back to the main part, the burial site. Okay, now Weezer said kind of in between the pond, Grainshed property, and a mile apart from each other in terms of the midsection of where Dylan's body was found. And it's basically midsection. So do we have the pond area as an example? I'm just going to try and measure it now if possible. Might not be the most accurate because I'm only doing it on the spot, but you can get an idea. So we just roughly put it there. The pond area. Look at that, just about 1 mile. So that ticks the box there from Weezer's description. If we do it from the Grainshed property, just about 1 mile as well, from point A to point B, the midsection of it. So that does match Weezer's description. But as said, my own description, what I heard elsewhere was more in depth. Okay, much more in depth. See, people have different ways of telling the story, describing events and whatnot. You just got to try and listen in and interpret it. And thankfully, I was able to do. So, zoom in here. That's facing almost west. You see Tacoma Road over that way, and that's where the border is. So when we saw the description given by the news that Dylan Rounds was found near to Lucin, that's incorrect. Dylan Rounds was found within Lucin, Utah, okay? Even the actual marker of Lucin is near over that way, so it's within Lucin, Utah, despite what the articles say, which is slightly incorrect. So here we go. And as well, we heard the descriptions officially that Dylan Rounds' body was found, recovered near to the border. It's not near to the border. The border is well over that way. So once again, exaggeration. Okay? Now you could say, yeah, but you know, the reporters and the officials will know more. But do they really? Okay? Or can they only tell so much? Take in mind, information which I've been, in the presence of has come from people who have directly been there and witnessed it themselves. Now, one important factor to mention, okay, because we need to acknowledge it, the likes of Candice Cooley. It was said Candice Cooley has since visited Dylan Rounds' burial site. I understand, to take it in, to, I don't know, just maybe show some respect and, how else can you word it? Just take everything in, take a moment to breathe, slow things down, and just gather one's thoughts and feelings. But it was said within one of the articles that Candice Cooley was reluctant to reveal the location. Okay. As for Justin Rounds has been very quiet. Whether that be a good thing or not, Candice Cooley has been doing all the talking, which, even if people don't like, at least someone is. So we hear updates about the case. You got to at least acknowledge that, right? But the reason why Candice Cooley was reluctant to give the location, and still hasn't, not because of legal reasons, not because it will harm the case. Dylan Rounds has already been recovered from here. April 9th till now, it's been long enough for things to move on and for the investigation to carry over. So it's not like a sensitive location anymore. What's been done has been done, and the hole, remains open with the dirt surrounding it. That's it. Just like the hole within the grain shed for a certain length of time, it was never filled in, right? Something of value may have been found there, but it wasn't taped off. It wasn't restricted or anything like that. Just like the situation here, you could walk up to it. You could be on top of it, literally. Not in the hole, but kind of stood right next to it, peering down over it. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. Now, because it doesn't harm the case and because there's no legal implications, that's why I'm able to look at it today and share it with you. But on top of it, the additional point by Candice Cooley, and I do understand, Candice Cooley didn't want the location to be revealed because it could attract locals. Okay? I understand that. But this is the thing. Locals have already been there. And who knows who else have visited the location. So even before Candice Cooley came out with that explanation as to why she didn't want it revealed, locals have already flocked to the area. So with them knowing, the news will spread and more people will know, right? So it would be like fighting a losing battle. It's already happened. And because it's already happened, I'm not the reason for it. That's why I'm looking at it today. I'm not the catalyst behind that mess. That's why there is a right place and a right time. And that's why we're doing it right now. Because I don't see anyone else doing it. As said, a range of people have talked, but no one has put it into play as for either boots on ground or aerial footage or an analysis. But that's why I'm here, to get that clarity, maintain that balance, stability. Not everybody will like this. Some people may get triggered for whatever reason. Who knows? You can tell people at times can be a bit petty, but I'm just doing what I can right now to present it to you. So, zooming on in. The gate to the Grainshed property, the other one. The fence line facing somewhat south. Facing this way, west. More southwest or so roughly, Bald Eagle Mountain. I've given the coordinates before, but I'll try and do it again. I might have to just adjust it. There we go. It's like roughly in the area, okay? It is one of those things where if you was present, you'd have to be right at it to see, because there is a few blind spots, because it might be hard to see for yourself, but it's not even the ground. I can't flip the screen anymore, but there is a hill. Not a mountain, but there is a slight hill. Let me know if you can see it. The ground is raised. Can you see where the marker is? Just lower down from the top of the hill where it's lighter coloured, where it's patchy, just a bit lower down where it gets to like a little ditch area, roughly here. So it's towards the bottom of the hill in a dip area where the terrain dips in. Why was that the spot by Brenner? That's what we've got to try and understand. They did say it was a shallow grave, kind of matches the, I guess, description by the individual what I presented earlier on in the video. But, you know, I just wanted to present it to you so you get an idea, okay? You see how it's raised here and it goes down a bit of a gradient to here in this area. Hopefully that's clear enough for you. I'll just rotate it round. Take in mind, this satellite imagery is of 2024, so it is more up to date, but it doesn't mean to say that this satellite imagery was taken April 9th. It was taken before April, I believe, just for clarity. If the satellite imagery was taken right now, would you be able to see the actual hole itself on satellite? Likely, no. Even the likes of a mine shaft in Nevada, Jomay Canyon, Mojave Desert near to Las Vegas, even that's very hard to see. And yet, if you're up close with it, it's very noticeable. That's just to put things into perspective when it comes to holes. If you want to see a hole on the map, satellite, it would have to be big in scale for it to be noticeable from bird's eye view because of the draw distance. So because of these hills, as it goes up and down, you can argue there are blind spots, okay? So this is just on the outer side of the Grainshed property, away from it, but not too far from the fence line. If we was to measure the distance, roughly, let's just put it there, from the burial site to the fence line, about 0.05 miles, to the gate, roughly, about 0.09 miles. From the Grainshed property, if you weren't to follow a specific route, it's about 1 mile, as we already said before, with the description by Weezer, and roughly about 1 mile there. from Don Hatley's place, because take in mind, there is a small chance that Dylan Rounds could have been buried on the same day he was murdered in that spot, unless there was a temporary burial near or at the Grangeshed property. Then came the 29th, in which then Dylan was disposed of. Not quite certain now with the details because that hasn't come out yet. That's why we're doing this now, to put it into perspective. About 2.8 miles from Don Hatley's trailer place of living to the burial site. It does just so happen that there are roads which do pass by the area if one was to dispose of Dylan Rounds on the day and at the time of going to Don Hatley's place for the barbecue, as with more so James Brenner. Okay? What we can do now is kind of go back over the day of the 28th of May 2022 and try and put it into perspective on the possibility that Dylan Rounds was buried in that spot near the fence line on the same day. It's not a guarantee. The location, from the looks of it and how it's been worded, is correct. But as for the day it occurred on, that is unknown. Unless there's more breaking news, the sentencing, more details emerge, can't really do much at this moment in time, right? We just zoom on out. We're facing north. What I want to do is go to Dylan's farm area. This is Dylan's farm, or you could say former farm, because he's no longer able to operate on it. The pivot here, you see circular. That's where his trailers were, his pickup truck was. There's the coordinates in case you were wondering. This area was a place of interest, considering on the 28th, the day Dylan Rounds was murdered, a bit later on in the morning time, Dylan Rounds' phone pinged in this area. But this was past 7:27. So Brenner was in possession of Dylan Rounds' phone. So likely Brenner went down to Dylan's farm to look about whilst being in possession of Dylan's phone. Hence why it pinged down here and then later pinged back at Brenner's trailer, in case you're wondering. Now, originally I was talking about, if Dylan Rounds was shot. At the time, suggesting was Dylan's firearm used against him? But if that happened, surely Dylan would have had to have been in possession of his firearm on site at the Grangeshed property for Brenner to get hold of and shoot him on the spot. Because it wouldn't have made any sense if Dylan was at the Grangeshed property, Brenner went down to Dylan's farm, got the gun, came back, then shot Dylan. It wouldn't be practical. It wouldn't tie in line with the timing at all. So there was a bit of back and forth tussling with those ideas in the past. We could possibly go over it in an individual video, if that's what you would like to see. We could call it Dylan Rounds' Cause of Death Map Analysis, understanding the ins and outs of the time-lapse footage, making sense of it. If you'd like to see that, let me know your thoughts in the comment section right now or the live chat. I need to know, so then I can start proceeding on with the next video. And I could possibly keep the same markers and beacon points on screen for when I do the future analysis, so we keep it consistent with what we've been looking at, okay? So, in terms of this area, when Dylan Rounds was last alive in the morning time, early morning of May 28th, 2022, but was seen in action working on site of his farm late at night the day before, which was Friday, May 27th, 2022, around 11:30 p.m. to 11:45 p.m. by hikers who were camping nearby at, I don't know if it's called Little Pigeon or just called Pigeon Mountains. Sometimes the name shows up, other times it doesn't. Looks like it's not this time. But where you see those mountains there, okay, nearby, Little Pigeon Mountains. It's a bit blurry, it's probably just lacking in processing. But Little Pigeon Mountains does overlook Dylan's farm, as we see here, okay? So campers in the area around here on top of the peak or lower down, overlooking Dylan's farm. Noticed tractor lights were on. Basically, Dylan Rounds was finishing off planting seeds, doing what he needed to do last minute before calling it a day. Dylan Rounds was doing custom farm work for other people days before and fetching parts and pieces earlier on in the day, supposedly. Was it for John Sheldon? Can't quite remember, but nevertheless, Dylan was busy. So with what little time he had, he was doing his own stuff at his farm. Then came the following morning, the day of his death, 28th of May 2022. And I believe there was a description possibly, either of the phone ping or something else, that it was around 6 a.m. when Dylan Rounds was possibly awake or so. Or maybe more so, it was the timestamp of when it started to rain early on in the morning, 5 a.m. onwards. And obviously, Dylan Rounds needed to park his grain truck in the grain shed. So whether it be heavy rain or light rain, Dylan Rounds waking up to it, obviously would have been alerted and thought, oh no, okay, the grain truck has got like a sheeting over it, a sheath, but it'll only keep it dry for so long. I need to park the grain truck in the grain shed to keep it safe so the seeds aren't spoiled, because if they are, it's a waste of a product and a waste of money. It's valuable, and more so to Dylan. So that's Dylan's objective of the day. And supposedly, once Dylan Rounds was to accomplish that, he would have moved away forever, for how long ever, to visit family or grandparents. That's what he was originally going to do, but he never got the chance. So, 28th, early on in the morning or so, 6 a.m. onwards, at some point, Dylan Rounds drives down, heading west towards Sun Tunnels. Apologies if it doesn't quite load in. I'll reset it if it's needed. But coming down to Sun Tunnels, zoom on out. There we go. It's a bit clearer when I zoom on out. Sun Tunnels here, as you see. Okay. Dylan's farm down there. He's come up this road, takes a right turn to go up to the grain shed property, as like highlighted in blue. Just focus in. And then making it to the gate, whether it was locked or not, Dylan Rounds was able to overcome it and gain access. But just before doing that, 6:51 a.m. roughly is when Dylan calls his grandmother Karen Rounds about what he's going to do, park grain truck in grain shed, and call her back later. That never happened, so it did spark concern, and onwards that's how it followed through. Family eventually coming on down following day later or two, okay? But 6:51, a call was made. That's when someone last heard of Dylan Rounds in terms of his voice. So other people in the background have gave BS stories like it was a text conversation. No, it wasn't. It was an actual call made, right? It's remained consistent that, and it's never changed since. Shortly afterwards, though, at about 6:58 a.m, Dylan attempted to call Brenna. No one answered. It does make you think, what would have happened if Brenna answered the call by Dylan? Because there might have been a chance that Dylan Rounds was calling either because of the gate or because of the grain shed property of what Dylan was intending on doing early on in the morning. Maybe Dylan wanted to let Brenna know what was going to happen so no one is startled with it being early. Dylan wanted to give him a warning, an alert as to what to expect, so there was no trespassers approaching. But unfortunately, Brenna did not answer, whether that be by choice or he was asleep. So Dylan Rounds just proceeded to go onwards down to the grain shed property, as we see down here. And in doing so, the next phone ping was around 7:03 a.m. and that was near to the grain shed property, as we see here. What happened from here? Well, from 7:03 a.m. to 7:27 a.m. You kind of round it up, round it down, within a 30-minute period. That's when the death of Dylan Rounds occurred and when James Brenner murdered Dylan by shooting him in the head at least twice. As for the actual location of where it happened, likely near to the grain shed or within, depending how far Dylan Rounds was able to do what he set out to do at the time, parking the grain truck in the grain shed. It was said later, around the 30th of May onwards, past Dylan's death and burial, etc., Justin Rounds had a conversation, Dylan Rounds' father, with the killer, James Brenner, unknown to him at the time. And James Brenner highlighted that Dylan Rounds was trying to park the grain truck in the shed and damaged a horse gate. Upon further inspection, we looked at the grain shed property within, and while Salty Pancakes likes to claim credit for all of that, Glorin Dellen was another key pivotal person that visited the location later, so with the help of their footage as well. And from Candice Cooley or East Idaho News, because they had their own footage of the grain shed earlier on, we could see there was some kind of horse gate on the side when you go into the entrance on the right and left. On the left, one of the pieces of metal, the gate, looked bent and damaged. Possibly Dylan Rounds, when reversing the grain truck in the grain shed, may have crashed into it if Brenner wasn't anticipating anyone parking a vehicle in that shed, right? So there's possibilities there. As for the motivations, the true motive behind why Brenner killed Dylan on that day, in that moment, kind of uncertain. We can look at that in another video analysis because Candice Cooley did give an explanation behind a motive, but it's kind of worded differently from depending where you hear it from. Candice Cooley and then a news article, it differs, the wording and language. So we will look at that at a later point. Just right now, I'm telling you the original story and the possibilities as told from the likes of Brenner when talking to Justin. Could have been BS because Brenner has lied before and kind of lied and wiggled his way around stuff. But if the horse gate was closed, that could have startled Brenner, which caused him to exit his trailer, which was just near to this black box there, that little shed. It was roughly in this area here. It's kind of blurry, unfortunately, but, you know, we zoom out there. Brenner coming out of his trailer, approaching Dylan directly in the grain shed or nearby, and then what? I saw some comments recently that they were tussling and rolling on the floor in some kind of fight. Who knows if that really was the case, but it must have been somewhat up close and personal for Brenner to have blood all over him, because from 7:03 to 7:27, the murder took place, but as for the desecration, that probably happened later on in the day or the following day, right? Because we're taking into consideration the timing of how things played out. There wouldn't have been enough time from 7:03 to 7:27 to kill and bury a person. I mean, if it's a temporary burial, maybe, but you get my idea. Now, I had my own thoughts and ideas in the past that maybe Dylan did manage to park the grain truck in the shed. Brenner possibly took Dylan out as an ambush or like confrontational, a disagreement, an argument, being defensive of his horse, protective of things being damaged on property. Who knows? We need to acknowledge that there was a hole within the grain shed towards the back end of it, whether that be where Dylan Rounds was killed at or buried at, or something was buried there, or some kind of leakage of possible blood or so. That would have been covered, obstructed by the grain truck. So there is that small possibility that either Dylan Rounds was killed before he got the chance to park the grain truck in the grain shed, and then Brenner finished the job by parking the grain truck in the grain shed just to conceal that spot within the shed as a form of concealment, and that's all. Or that Dylan Rounds did manage to park it in, or so far, got out, and then had it with Brenner, had that confrontation, disagreements, and falling outs. Different ways of looking at it, but it was confirmed that Dylan Rounds was shot at least twice in the head by Brenner, right? Must have been somewhat up close for that blood, whether it be a blood splatter or blood leaking onto Brenner. you got to also acknowledge that if Brenner was to drag or move Dylan Rounds temporarily whilst carrying him or dragging him, that close contact could have led to blood being smeared on Brenner's shirt and hands. Got to acknowledge that too. Now, as for the talk about Brenner using Dylan's own firearm against him, thankfully, Weezer did respond back earlier today by saying where that claim came from was a friend or someone that knew Justin Rounds, the father of Dylan Rounds, that said about it, and that was in the past. Interesting how it's not come up that often though. Very interesting. But I guess it resurfaced in recent time just because of it being confirmed that Dylan Rounds was shot. I mean, as said, it was quite self-explanatory with a bit of common sense that from 7:03 Dylan Rounds last alive to 7:27 when that's already gone, his life taken, that Brenner just so happens to be in his trailer cleaning a firearm, of all things, considering Dylan Rounds being shot not long before that, right? And blood on him and DNA from Dylan on the shirt too. The clothing worn as seen in the time-lapse as seen earlier on when Brenner shot Dylan. So it's very obvious you can piece it all together there. Was Brenner in shock or not? Who knows? How did he feel at the time? We don't know. There are still many details there which are unknown. I said the true location of where Dylan Rounds was killed on the spot specifically has not been revealed, but it's likely on site. Likely on site. Whether it's in the shed or outside, that remains a bit of a question. I'm just being honest with you, okay? So what happened then after 7:27 a.m? Dylan Rounds already dead from the looks of it. Brenner cleaning up after himself to an extent, and by then Brenner in possession of Dylan's phone. That was probably done to take it away from him because they didn't want to be traced or tracked if Brenner and when Brenner was willing to dispose of Dylan, right? Separate the items and possessions from Dylan. So I believe it was only up until 7:43 a.m. Okay, from 7:27 to 7:43, not much happened. Dylan's phone remained on site. But after 7:43, later on, that's when there was movement and it headed down, Dylan's phone pinging down at the farm area. So if I just go back to the road where Dylan Rounds came from earlier on in the day. How far down is it? Is it here? Yes. The phone at past 7:43 a.m. was down here, depending how long it took. Okay, whether Brenner drove down here or walked, very unlikely, probably drove. What in? His own vehicle? Not quite sure. But the phone did ping down here, and it pinged past the point of Dylan being dead. So it wasn't Dylan in this area. It was likely Brenner because Brenner was already in possession of Dylan's phone, as we've seen. What was Brenner doing down here? Who knows? What did he take? Who knows? Gun, key fob? Well, if it was the gun, it wouldn't have been down here. The gun would have been earlier on and it would have been in possession of Dylan, whether it be in his grain truck or strapped to Dylan at the time when going down to the grain shed property. Okay, because if the story is truly true, besides the factor being, as a fact, Dylan was shot by a firearm, if it was true that the firearm was Dylan's and it was used against him, well, Dylan would have had to have been in possession of the firearm on site of the grain shed property for Brenner to get a hold of it. And if that was also the case, then it must have been up close personal. I'm going to give you my vision right now of what could have happened, just as an update, whether people agree with it or not. Do you know, like when you get the movies where people are up close, CQB combat and fist fighting, one person grabs the knife off the other person by the belt or the leg or the ankle, pulls it out and then stabs the person? The same could happen with a gun. You're tussling about, you're rolling on the ground, and suddenly you hear a bang. And then the video, the soap, the movie ends, or there's a break and you're thinking, who got shot? There was a gunshot, but who received the bullet? And then shortly afterwards, you see the person then roll over and then you think, oh, they got shot. Did that happen with Brenner and Dylan if they were up close, physical and rolling about? Was Brenner just simply going to fight Dylan with fist like with Bibbins in 2021? Was that a possibility there? And it just so happened that because Dylan had a firearm on him, Brenner saw that and tried grabbing it off him and shot Dylan that way. I don't think it would have been an accident at all. Not at all. Okay? Aiming for the head seems, planned. Not planned, but done with intent. Hence the charges as what we see in second-degree murder. Okay? 2 shots to finalise the deal to make sure that Dylan's dead on the spot. And then the dust settles. That's what I'm thinking possibly. Let me know your thoughts. That was just my idea. So, to return back to the farm of Dylan's, if I can locate it properly. Do you know what? It's a big pain to come across it, isn't it? There we go. So obviously, past 7:43 a.m, the next phone ping movement is down at Dylan's farm. Brenner searching about for items to steal for his own gain or to use in the disposure of Dylan rounds, possibly. Nevertheless, the phone ping later does end back up at the site at the grain shed, Brenner's trailer, and I believe it was 8:30. Was it 8:03 a.m? Because it was roughly 30 minutes spent at Dylan's farm on the day when Brenner was down there in ownership, in possession of Dylan's phone. 30 minutes spent rummaging around at Dylan's farm. Was anything taken? Was there much found? Who knows? But likely Brenner already in possession of the firearm of Dylan's. As for the key fob, whether that was on Dylan at the time at the grain shed, well, both could have been taken right there. And then maybe Brenner decided to use that key fob to head down to the grain shed to Dylan's farm as a form of opportunistic behaviour. What can I gain from this? Could I use the key fob for his vehicle or his trailer and see what I can find? That's just a suggestion, that's all I'm saying. I know the mother said that Dylan never locked his vehicle, but maybe Brenner didn't know that. So that's why he took the items from Dylan at the time to make use of them for his own gain or in the methods of disposing of Dylan at the time. Nevertheless, Brenner made it back to his trailer. And as what was said by Candice Cooley and also Justin Rounds, at 8:03 a.m, there was still no movement at all from Dylan's phone. Doesn't mean to say that Brenner spent all the time there in his trailer from then on. He could have moved about. He may have just left the phone in his trailer at the time whilst he was finalising things. Take in mind, it was later on in the afternoon when Brenner was supposed to be attending Don Hatley's barbecue. That supposedly did happen and it was successful in getting to the area. But along that journey, later on in the day, it just so happened that Dylan Round's phone pinged once again, and it was the final ping. And it was near to Lucin Pond, in which, when the authorities went down there at a later point, they did find Dylan's phone. And we'll get to that section in a second, okay? But from 8:03 a.m, not much happened. Only once it got past lunchtime, past 12 o'clock, I think it might have been 1:30 p.m. when there was movement or the beginning of movement. Take in mind, I'm not sure if that timestamp is Nevada time or Lucin, Utah time. But one thing that I know for certain, the final phone ping of Dylan Round's phone in possession of Brenner was at 3:51 p.m. At 3:51 p.m, Brenner was at Lucin Pond and disposed of the phone there to destroy evidence and to not be traced or tracked. Was Dylan Rounds buried before that or after? That kind of remains unknown. But in terms of the direction we're going to go in now, you can tie it in with possibilities, okay? So just imagine it's gone past lunchtime in the afternoon. Brenner's getting ready to go to Don Hatley's place over in that direction, roughly speaking. Now, there's 2 ways Brenner could go, such as in his vehicle, if that was the case. Taking this road here, which goes somewhat north, and then you take a left and you go down that way towards the gate and towards the area where Dylan Round's body was found buried. That's one way. Or you could go that way, and I think you go onto Pilot Mountain Road. And Candice Cooley said Brenner took the back road, so I'm assuming that's the back roads. All roads lead to the location and spot. I'll show you shortly. The only other thing I want to highlight is if it was up this way, past that point and the wash up to these railroad tracks, Candice Cooley reported saying how Brenner sent his horse up that way to the railroad tracks and parted ways with it. He let it go. On the same day, a day later, not quite sure, but there was horse track marks leading up to that area near the railroad tracks, so that could tie in. Why did Brenner release the horse? Is it because he knew he was going to be taken away and he wanted someone else to look after it? Supposedly Kurt Wadsworth Taylor looked after the horse and then it was sent elsewhere after. I mean, you know, Brenner kind of getting on with Kurt Wadsworth, Kurt looking out for Brenner at the time. Can you look after my horse? Yes, sir. Yes, sir. There you go. Possibly. But some people were highlighting, could the horse have played a role in disposing of Dylan if Brenner put Dylan on the horse and then, you know, directed the horse to the area? But then I don't think Brenner would walk, so it must have still been a vehicle form of transportation. Let's not also forget that at 3 p.m. on the 28th of May, 3 p.m, Brenner possibly already on the way down to Don Hatley's place. One thing that was at the Grainshed property, though, seen leaving the property, heading towards Sun Tunnels, where witnesses known as Walt and Michelle highlighted that they saw a blue Jubilee truck leaving the property. What was that Jubilee truck doing? Is there a small chance that that Jubilee truck was driving towards the direction of the burial site, as that's where they were going to take Dylan Rounds to? But if that was the case, Brenner would have had to have been in that Jubilee truck as well, if Brenner is the one responsible for the desecration part, since he was originally charged with it and he guided people to that spot, right? That's what I'm just basing it off. We've not heard anything since with the Jubilee truck, so we can't reinforce it anymore, which is a shame. Just to highlight one last thing, which was later found past or on the 30th of May, so after Dylan's death and burial likely, not far from Brenner's trailer, about 100 to 200 yards from the Grainshed property. Over here, the dirt mound. I think I might have moved the marker a bit too far back, the dirt mound here. Just before it, you do see faint track marks. Can you see those track marks in the centre of the screen? They kind of curve round here and work their way to the dirt mound, right? The dirt mound was where Dylan Round's boots were found. The boots at the time were later confirmed to have Brenner's DNA touch fingerprints found on the boots, because Brenner took the boots to this area when disposing of them, likely on the 28th of May. So at the time, on that day, Brenner got the phone off Dylan, disposed of that later on in the day, may have disposed of Dylan the same day, and of course chucking the boots at the dirt mound, so separating and spreading the stuff out. I honestly don't know why Brenner decided to take the boots off Dylan. You know, why not all the other clothing? Why just the boots? Is it because that takes longer to break down and wear down and decompose, or they just don't decompose, so that's why Brenner thought he would take them off Dylan? I still think it's silly, because at the end of the day, when a body decomposes, what remains? Skeletal bones. The only way you can get rid of skeletal bones is if you grind them, crush them, burn them at an intense temperature. None of that happened, right? Because Dylan Brown's remains were found skeletal remains also. So there was no attempt there by Brenner to do a further form of desecration. And there was no real need to take the boots off Dylan, because if Dylan was to be buried in the hope that he would never be found, and to be honest, he never would have been found if it wasn't for Brenner and the plea deal, the boots probably should have remained on Dylan. By taking the boots off Dylan on the day and disposing of them at the dirt mound only created more foul play and a form of suspicion within the parents. Brenner did himself no favours with doing that. If he kept the boots on Dylan, there would have been less foul play, less evidence, and he might have had more of a chance and time to cover his tracks or lay low. But he didn't. We know he's a lazy individual. He's not a mastermind criminal, so mistakes will be made along the way. Take in mind his age as well. Disposing of a phone and dumping it in water nowadays isn't good enough when trying to destroy evidence. You can still trace it some way, maybe through iCloud, cloning a phone, a deep forensic dive, which the authorities did at a later point, and in November was able to find a time-lapse footage which dated back to the 28th of May 2022 at 7:27 a.m. at Brenner, just after the murder of Dylan Rounds, right? Brenner wouldn't have anticipated any of that. Because of his age, he thinks it's easy to dispose and destroy stuff, but nowadays technology is harder to, remove traces of evidence and footprints, digital carbon footprints, the lot, right? I just wanted to highlight this marker before it's neglected. So if Brenner going towards the pond to dispose of the phone, let's say, he could have taken this route. Taking this route by Brenner would have led up to going to the gate, and it would have led to the fence line and literally by the side, Dylan Round's burial site. But if Brenner wasn't intending on disposing and desecrating Dylan's body immediately, then it could tie back with what Candice Cooley was explaining, that the back road was taken from the way Dylan Rounds first came. So Brenner, in his vehicle, let's just say, in possession of Dylan's phone. Did Brenner have Dylan's firearm or key fob on him when he went to Don Hatley's? We don't know. But let's just stick with the original story of how things went, supposedly. Brenner going down the back road, going through the gate, probably locked it, knowing him. Taking a right here, driving down, because it is a dirt road, it is accessible. And not far away, in parallel, not that he would have done, but he could have done, taken a right turn here at any point in the day if he was disposing of Dylan. The reason why I say that is if you take a right here, you follow the track marks because they are visible. You can either turn right to that bra shed, or supposedly you can turn left and drive in parallel with the fence line. Now the track marks are harder to follow here. They only seem to show just before it and way down there at the start of the gate. So maybe Brenner didn't drive all the way down in parallel to the fence line when disposing of Dylan, but that was just a suggestion. So if Brenner was still just focused on disposing of the phone only, taking a trip down here to then turn right, which is not far from Lucin Hill, as you just see there, centre the screen just in front. I believe this is Pilot Mountain Road, correct me if I'm wrong. Driving down this way would mean connecting onto, I think, Tacoma Road, if that's what it's still called as. I discontinued the blue line here so it didn't overlap the original marker, what I explained earlier on. But Brenner could have gone down this way, and then once here, instead of taking a left, if you took a left, you'd go towards Montello, Nevada. Instead, take a right here, Brenner going through the wash, as you see how it dips down, and then being in parallel to the pond. So Brenner could have, stopped, parked up here, got out of his vehicle, well, he would have done, walked up to the pond, as you see here, and chucked the phone in. That's the coordinates of Lucin Pond. So that would have been a success in the eyes of Brenner, thinking he's disposed of it, so Dylan can't be tracked or traced or the location, and Brenner unaware of the phone ping as well. As you see, 3:51 p.m. final phone ping. Okay? Once Brenner did that, getting back in his vehicle and then driving to Don's, likely this dirt road here, which is the main one, which allows a person to cross over the railroad tracks because there is a crossing, as you see. Driving down here, winding in and out, Lucin Airport over that way, but taking a left here. And instead of going straight down, like how Lance Kelly and Ty Corbin claimed as to be the location of Don's place, which was a load of BS and bollocks and misinformation, you take a left turn before that to head down this dirt road as you see. Now, suppose it's a gravelled road, or part of it is further down. On the left, I believe you've got the Thousand Spring or Thousand Creek Spring Wash, which if you do follow it, goes in and out. If you followed it up north, it goes to Grouse Creek, but if you go left and follow it down that way, it does reach or approaches Montello, Nevada, just before the border, which then over the border, you come across Luray Wash. Luray Wash being a wash which flooded in 2017, as we saw the photos and imagery, and the locals in Montello were affected by it quite negatively, if you remember. That's just a reference history point there. But highlighted in blue, the journey Brenner would have took to get to Don's place. There's a bit of a turnaround point. There is, I think, a waterhole there or so for animal, wildlife, cattle. There is a dirt road there, which if you do follow, just as a heads up briefly, Thousand Spring Creek, it does lead into the wash, which is very convenient. As we see here, it drops down. Can you see the wash? The wash here? The track marks faintly, as you see in the distance, do come down to the wash. So would that be the hands of Brenner? Well, there wouldn't be any need to be, since Dylan wasn't buried here. He was buried further back the way we came, so we don't need to focus too much here. Maybe Don Hatley used it in the past when getting about, using the dirt roads, possibly. But that's just so you know where that direction goes. Brenner avoiding that and taking a right turn here around this bend, and then parking up on site where you see a trailer or shack-like object, and then hanging out with Don Hatley. Now, some of you may be wondering, well, okay, that happened 28th of May 2022 over Memorial Day weekend. How come there is no true trailer or stuff that matches up with what we've seen previously in that flyby footage of Heavy D, which was early June of 2022, and even the Dylan Rounds documentary? Why does that not show here? Where's the red truck or the red vehicle or the quad bike, the actual RV trailer? Why is none of that present on site right now? I'll explain why. Because the footage, what we saw, was in the past, around the time of when Don Hatley was still living in Lucin, Utah. Fast forward onwards, post Dylan Round's death and all that news coming out, whether Don Hatley was truly involved or not, whether he felt guilty and needed to escape from the area, whether he felt like that Justin Rounds was on his back and he was on to him, or if Don Hatley broke down for whatever reason and wanted to be closer to family, Don Hatley did leave Lucin, Utah, and took items, vehicles, and possessions with him, leaving behind the odd trailer, as you see on site, supposedly. It doesn't really look like a trailer, it looks more like a shack or a shed, right? But this area is 100% Don Hatley's place of living. If you are skeptical, if you don't believe me, which is very unfortunate if that's the case, look back to my previous videos. I clearly documented the area, I clearly highlighted it, and I did a comparison side-by-side analysis of Heavy D's footage, which was confirmed by the documentary crew of it being Don Hatley's place of living, and then tying it in with Bing Maps, which is 2022 imagery, and it just so happens to highlight everything on site, in place, in the right location. So it is confirmed to be Don Hatley's place of living, or should I say, former place of living. So yes, on the day of the 28th, later on in the afternoon, Brenner spent time here with Don Hatley. For how long for? We don't know. And we can't really track it the same way because Dylan Brown's phone was disposed of earlier on at the pond. So that's about it there. As for Brenner's phone, James Brenner's phone pings, we never heard about it and it's never been brought up since. Interesting. So, at some point later on, Brenner would have made his way back to the Grainshed property, going back the way he came, or possibly taking a slightly different alternative if he decided to go left here. For example, going through the gate and getting back to the Grainshed property here. Did it happen on the 28th though, Dylan Rounds being disposed of completely? Or was there only a temporary burial as like what Candice Cooley believed at the time and hasn't changed her mind since? There is possibilities there. We know where Dylan Rounds was buried at eventually. We just don't know exactly what day or what time he was buried at by Brenner. But Dylan Rounds was recovered though April 9th, 2024, years later. It's taken some time. We can do a quick overview, right? The key questions of why wasn't Dylan Rounds found earlier? We can do that in a second. I just wanted to finalise my thoughts here. So whether it be the 28th or even the 29th, it should have been within that period when Dylan Rounds was taken and buried near to the fence line of the outer skirt of the border of the Grangeshed property land on the outer skirt of it, nearby, near to the other gate. Likely, because if it happened any later past that point, it would have been harder to do so with the likes of the parents coming on down, the police search and rescue beginning 30th of May onwards. So it probably was either the 28th or the 29th when Dylan Rounds was disposed of. How exactly? Well, we know the location, but how exactly? How was the hole dug up? By hand? By machinery? That remains unknown. No details have been given there officially, and that's just me being honest and from what I've seen, or the lack of what I've seen there. Was it all Brenner's doing? From the looks of it, yeah. Due to the location and due to it being a shallow grave, it matches Brenner's description of being a lazy, half-hearted person when it comes to doing tasks and jobs. So that can tie in there. Is there any small chance someone may have assisted and helped him? Maybe, but officially no other claims were brought up about Brenner having help. To some people who may have just joined in recently and heard the news about the charges of desecration, burying and concealing Dylan Rounds' remains, it was said recently that those charges were dropped from Brenner. Does that mean that Brenner is innocent there? No, it was just because it was a part of the plea deal. Because Brenner showed authorities where Dylan was buried at, that was pretty much admitting that Brenner was likely responsible for the desecration, hence why he was originally charged with it in the first place. But because of the plea deal, you give and take, you give something that they want, and then you get something what you want, charges, some of them are dropped, which means certain sentences being reduced or removed, so it helps his overall sentencing in the future with how much time he has to serve in jail. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense there. Brenner's still very likely responsible. Murdered Dylan, was quick enough to dispose of the phone and conceal, made a poor attempt to conceal and dispose of the boots, so why not the body as well? Exactly. How would you get to the spot though? If you're James Brenner on the 28th or 29th, how would you get to the area to dispose of Dylan? Well, you could follow this line, the dirt road. I said drive to the gate, drive through, and then on this side on the outer side of the border perimeter, where those track marks are likely, driving up, parking to the side, and then walking up to there. Take in mind, there is a bit of a hill, there is a little bit of a gradient. It's very interesting that this, roughly, the area was the spot, the desired location by Brenner. Of all places and things, why roughly in this area where there's a bit of a hill? Wouldn't that be, I know, wouldn't that impact Brenner's health or his stamina if he's got to go up a bit of a climb or a bit of a dip? You know, excuses made in his physical state at the time. Surely he would do it on pure flat ground, but not quite. But it was lower down on the hill, so there was a chance. It's just interesting how this, in this area, was the desired place by Brenner. I mean, not far from here, you've got the wash, right? It's a bit of a weird colour. You got the wash here. The wash being the original spot where Candice Cooley strongly believed where Dylan Rounds was buried at. Yet that wasn't the case. But near to the wash, just here, that's where it was. Zoom on in. We try and flip the image if possible. It's a bit difficult to do so. But hopefully you can see like the raised ground where the red marker is next to the fence line. So there is a bit of a hill. What was going through Brenner's mind? Why did he choose this area of all places? Why did he not go further south? Why did he not go further east? Why this particular spot? The only thing that I could think of is, was it done here because Brenner was on the way to Don Hatley's place and that if you think about it, this yellowed coloured dirt road, which traces back to Brenner's place of living, if he was to follow it heading west, eventually he would get to Don Hatley's place for the barbecue. It just so happened that Brenner was willing to dispose of Dylan's phone on the way down to the barbecue. What's to say that Brenner was on the way down to dispose of Dylan's body too at the same time? Because what we need to acknowledge is, what about the timing of it all? How long would it actually take to get from the Grainshed property down to Don Hatley's place? I don't think it would take too long. If it was truly around 1:30 p.m. onwards, or 2:30 p.m, round that or so, when there was then movement, or that's when Brenner decided to get going, to give him time in between, along the way on the journey to dispose and drop off stuff, to then get to Don Hatley's, that would make sense. It's like cleaning up after yourself in the direction you're going, because the priority is you want to get to Don Hatley's place for the barbecue, you want to be on time, but you want to head out a bit earlier so you can dispose of things along the way. Almost like breadcrumbs and trails, not leading up to Don's place for the final hidden object, but just dumping things along the way. Does that make sense to people? Because if Brenner was willing to dispose of the phone at Lucin Pond on the way down to Don's place, the same could have happened with the body. Though, granted, it would have taken a bit of time, though. And if it was the case, what would Brenner have used to have dug that hole? Would he have used his vehicle to get down there with Dylan in the back seat, or on the back of the pickup truck, let's just say, with a spade in hand? Or is that too much work for Brenner? The only reason why I'm coming up with this possibility is because when you follow this dirt road, although it's different to the one Candice Cooley described, going directly this way does pass the area, the burial site of where Dylan's body was placed by Brenner. And it just so happens that when you do follow it onwards, as if you were going to Don's place, you do end up going through the wash. And then here, you're right next to the pond where the phone was disposed of. And that was at 3:51 p.m. So at what time did Brenner exactly leave the Grainshed property, heading on down to Don Hatley's trailer? Because in the past, there was a few timestamps thrown about, and I was saying, well, isn't that like an hour or two? Wouldn't that take too long? What was Brenner doing then within that period of time? You get what I'm saying? Because there was some quiet moments in the day. So you can say that for later on in the day. You can also say for earlier on, before lunchtime, there was a level of silence and not much movement going on. That Dylan's phone remained at the Grainshed property at 8:03 up to when Brenner decided to leave, and then at the pond on the way down to Don's, disposing of that phone, the final ping being 3:51 p.m. A few hours had passed. So the hours from when, if Dylan Rams was disposed of, the hours from when and if it was on the way down to Don's place with Dylan in the back seat. Because I don't think Brenner would drive on down to Don Hatley's and say, oh, let's have a barbecue now. I've just brought my friend with me, but he's not quite there with it at the moment. And then Don looks and thinks, no shit, he's dead. I don't think Brenner would do that, because depending if Don Hatley is involved or not, if not, then it would just basically incriminate Brenner, and then Don would be a witness, and then Don could grass up on Brenner, and then it would have been over and done with there, and that wasn't the case. You get what I'm saying? So it's just trying to understand exactly when was the body disposed of, on the day of the murder or the day after. It would have been a short space of time, though. I want to know your thoughts. And as we measured the distance and we looked at the markers, depending which route you take, highlighted in yellow, you can pass by the burial site and you can also pass by the pond. So Brenner was disposing of multiple things at once whilst on the journey down to Don's place. That would work, okay? If you was to go, though, on the blue line, and I believe connects onto Pilot Mountain Road, you would only be passing the pond. You wouldn't be passing that other gate nor the fence line close to the railroad tracks. You wouldn't be passing that. The only way you would be able to do so is if you went down the back road here, as highlighted with that gate from the Grainshed property, and then taking a right turn here, as you see those track marks, which is near to the bra shed, but taking a left and then following it in line with the fence line, going all the way down to then dispose of Dylan roughly in this area here, lower down to that hill, then connecting on to the dirt road as you see, connecting on, and then making your way down to the pond area and passing by there. So there are the ideas. Now, one point was thrown about yesterday. I can't remember who said it. Was it Classy? Was it Watcher of Drama? Was it another person? I don't know. Whoever it is will know. But what one person said, whether it be on behalf of what the LE said or someone else said, doesn't sound too good, right? But some people in the background were claiming that Dylan Rounds was found on top of a mountain or near to a mountain. Now, you can argue and say he was found near or lower down to a hill, such as here, which is the case, but if we're talking about mountains, the only time that came up into conversation was way over here, Pilot Peak, as you see highlighted. You can see the great distance and height. Pilot Peak was mentioned early on in the Dylan Rounds case. When investigations and questioning unfolded early on, it was Don Hatley, an individual that passed with flying colours on the lie detector test, but gave false information and a false lead to the police when highlighting where Dylan Rounds could be buried or could be at. And Don Hatley said, oh, I believe maybe on Pilot Peak, that's where Dylan is at, and some other things. The police spent a total of 4 hours or so getting up there. However, on foot or by helicopter, made their way to Pilot Peak, found absolutely nothing to do with Dylan, came back down, and whether it be a sheriff or a detective, had quite a good word with Don Hatley about it, and I believe may have pinned him against the wall as well. I can understand wasting police time. They're not going to appreciate that. So why did Don Hatley give false information like that? Was that to cover for Brenner, so it gave Brenner time to move additional things about? Or did Don Hatley truly believe that Pilot Peak was a location? If, for whatever reason, Don Hatley was suspicious that people in the area could have been responsible, would Don honestly think anyone would take Dylan to a Pilot Peak mountain of all places? Absolutely not, unless Don knew that but decided to create a false story to help and cover for Brenner. There's no need to give false leads. Kurt Wadsworth gave a false lead on the 31st of May, which got the attention of the family and police by saying Dylan Rounds held hostage in Montello, Nevada by Chase Venstra and Aviles. That was a load of rubbish, but supposedly Kurt Wadsworth was influenced by one of his ex-girlfriends who's a psychic, basically a bullshitter. Okay, so that was a waste of time there, because Dylan was nowhere near over that way in Montello. He was here, roughly speaking. Okay, and for anyone that does join late, I strongly advise you to rewind back to the beginning. But just to highlight once again, I was able to track and locate the area through certain descriptions and not through Weezer. On top of that, it's based off the eyes on ground. People that have actually been there themselves, seen it, seen the hole, seen the dirt laying around it, scattered around. People who've seen it themselves and then reported back by describing it. Hence why I was able to find it, because I do have quite a bit of knowledge with the area and when I do my map analysis. So I wanted to tie this all together from everything we've known in the past, from the phone pings on the day to the items found. There might be a few markers missing, but I didn't want to go too heavy because I think we've mentioned enough already. As for the shooting, as for the murder, as for the time-lapse footage, we can always go back over that in a standalone video. There are a few ideas floating around, but that can wait for now. Hopefully this video has cleared things up for people. People may have already known the location roughly, but I needed to nail it on the head. Because as you know, I like to be as specific as I can. Now, I think earlier on in the title or the intro of this video, I said certain wording used in the video title. I guess we'll see how that goes. Maybe I'll edit it slightly, just depending, because, you know, there's a great deal of confidence here, but does one need to protect themselves with certain wording? I'll see how I feel as time goes on. but I just wanted to present this to you so you get an idea of things. And if people in the background are not too pleased with this, just understand that people were already flocking to the area long before I covered this video, so it wouldn't have made any difference at all. Okay? So, people in the background like to talk, but they don't act. I did. I hope you enjoyed it. And of course, hopefully you found it interesting. It'd be appreciated if you could like and share this video so more people see it. I'm aware that, yes, I can cover breaking news and important hard-hitting facts or events, coverage, analysis, photos, footage, whatever it may be, but not everybody sees it or searches for the answers. It can be disappointing, disheartening. There's not much I can do about it. Sometimes YouTube is to blame and other times it's additional factors. But by liking and sharing the video, it can mean more people see it and view it. And if you do have any points, questions, you can list it down below. Will people be skeptical of this video? Maybe. I do believe that people are very difficult to please. I shouldn't have to make an attempt in trying to please them, not at all, and not in a dodgy way either. I do what I do what I can, and then it's the decision of the people listening in to take it on board, put it into perspective at least, or just completely deny it and dismiss, because there'll always be some people like that out there. I'm also aware that there are some viewers on my channel that may engage with darker forces out there. As long as you know what you're doing, not a problem. But if I do see any behavioural changes within anyone, and it's in a negative way, it will be addressed, it will be looked into, like how it's done beforehand. Formal procedure, conservation, preservation, and observational abilities in a overt, non-participant way, all under control, looks like how it always has been. More videos to come when the time is right, and depending if there's any more breaking news in between. I don't want videos to be overshadowed, so we'll just pace it evenly so everyone gets the chance to view these videos. So once again, hopefully you managed to watch all of this video. I appreciate it if you did, and just stitching everything together, because I said early on this is exactly what I was going to do eventually, and luckily, thankfully, I was able to do so. Granted, with the exception of a few markers or beacons not present, you get the idea of how things could have played out and the certain things that did happen. So, thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Goodbye, good night for now.